Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, one thing I'm really excited about that I wasn't planning on that I think is going to work really well with this talk is it's great to see we have so many people from all over. We got different parts of the U.S., Europe, and maybe some other places. And you have UK, which I guess technically is not Europe anymore. So we've got a nice broad area, and language and culture will play a bit about this. And this talk really goes hand in hand with what Ryan was just talking about, especially at the end where he's talking about aligning with reality and with meaning. We're going to look into that and looking at, so that, the talk says it's exploring embodiment through perceptual and linguistic non-dual inquiry. And that non-dual inquiry, as we'll see, will relate a bit with when Ryan was talking about meditation. And I'm going to be doing my best here to be taking some very complex existential models of being and really simplifying them down to try to fit this model of embodiment from a place of a felt sensed safety. But over thanks to Ryan, I've trimmed down. I had so many slides and so much that I'm trying to get out here, and luckily he stepped in and we've simplified it. And yet each topic that I'm going to go over, these 6 main topics, each of them are huge, and they themselves would be their own area. So we're trying to get these multiple ideologies into a concise introduction into this paradox of embodiment. And I hope it's fun, and as we dive more into paradoxes. And so what we have here is a summary of much of what this talk will go into. We're going to use a few different models and methods and protocols of looking at these topics. And hopefully at the end, when I'm going to come back to this slide, that it will not only make more sense, but in addition to a deeper understanding in some, or maybe even all of the parts, you're going to have an experiential learning. So we're going to actually be playing. We're going to have exercises to not just have information coming in here, but to feel it. So what I write here is, if we want to be of service in the finding of freedom within one's lived experience, it can be of service to unravel or unfold what is keeping one restricted. And so this restriction or this lack of freedom I mentioned here, it can be a physiological bodily occurrence or a mental, emotional, spiritual one, right? And it can be everything in between, because as humans, we are both a physical body and metaphysical mind, thoughts, and any other unaware phenomena. And as we begin to untangle this conflation of the lived experience, we're able to find one's inherent freedom underneath that all, right? And what I mean by freedom here is essentially, our most ideal embodied nature. And we'll get more into that when we start to talk more about embodiment. And so I'll also say, in case you haven't already noticed, that this talk may be a bit didactic at first, right? Because I'm trying to show these different ways of freeing our bodies, and also looking at other bodies in relation to if we were therapists or body workers working with people. So not just ourselves, but others, right? And freeing them from constraints imposed by this somewhat misinformed mind. So that gets a bit didactic. So, and sometimes it is a top-down, as Ryan mentioned, top-down didactic model, and sometimes bottom-up, which will be felt experience. And that's why we're going to have exercises to pepper it in to make it a little more accessible, and more importantly, to feel it as opposed to just think it. And I'll just say that if it gets too heady at first, stay with me, as I promise that the headiness is kind of required to eventually get out from our head and reside more in this state of embodiment, which may even seem like a paradox of sorts. And we're going to see more of these paradoxes as we go through this journey together, because the paradox is really the key. And so here's a picture that I hope begins to give a framework of where we always are in relation to our thoughts and ideas. Right? So we have this white thing, which is awareness, which is, all of our thoughts are here. It's like whatever we're aware of. Right? In fact, we can't even really conceive of the red or the blue, because if we did, it would actually be within here. Right? So we're aware of these as sort of ideas, and we understand that we're unaware of them, but we don't really know what precisely it is that we're unaware of. And so then whatever's even beyond that and this blue and beyond, we have less of a clue. Right? And this becomes one of the paradoxes, again, an awareness to which we are not really aware. And it's possible to receive pointers to help us show outside of the current awareness, of which inquiry, which we'll look at, will be helpful. And the major difference with inquiry and being told is really one of empowerment and agency. And so we're really looking more at not just me telling you this information. I'm not even really that concerned about that. I'm concerned with the inquiry inwards and how does it work for you, right? So this way of learning by ourselves through our own effort, this is inquiry, right? And the other, being told, essentially is it's put upon us by outside sources. And once it's heard by us, we really have no choice but to listen. And it's impossible to not think of it. Even to try to ignore it or to think the other way is built upon this foundation inherent within the expressed point. And if that makes no sense, I'll try here to say that, think of an elephant in the room, right? And to think of that elephant in the room is to first to think of the elephant in the room, and then you say, okay, well, don't think about it. So then you have to think of the elephant in the room and then remove it out of the mind's concept, right? Or expressed in another way, we build up the idea of a room with an elephant as a foundational piece, and then we remove it from there somehow, as opposed to simply think of a blank room and ask what is there? What do we notice in the room? So when we learn by ourselves through being directed to perceive in various ways and places, we can then have a more direct and embodied relation to this new awareness. And so, as I've mentioned, I don't want to tell you anything as is. I only want to point to possible models of beingness. And if they can start to allow the red to move more into white, or even the blue to move more into red or whiteness, that's just an added bonus. And so this is the foundational models of which this whole meta model is based on. And I'll briefly go over them here, but we're going to dive into them more on here. And so meditation, and I'm talking about meditation here more from the Eastern process of meditation, which is sometimes known in the Proto-India areas as dhyana or contemplation. And dhyana leads into this place called samadhi. And samadhi is a way to be without thought, or said differently, of being before, between, or after thought. And we're going to get more into all of them. Zen inquiry, right? So inquiry, as I've mentioned a bit, is a way to have the person, whether ourselves or clients, start to answer themselves instead of someone else answering them for themselves, right? An outside person informing them, oh, you have this blockage here, you have this problem, which they then take on, or we take on ourselves. Oh, it must be true. My therapist, my massage practitioner, my whatever told me so, or my doctor. And so inquiry is a way to go beyond what was seen before, a way to grow that awareness of what could be. Phenomenology will be a part, in particular, influenced by a man named Maurice Merleau-Ponty. His work into the perception of senses and eco-psychology, it relates heavily with that. We'll see. And semantics is a way to understand, well, what are we really saying? And this ties in a lot with what Ryan was talking about as far as alignment with meaning. Finding ways to better be in conversation with ourselves and with the world around us, and building agency through speech to say what we truly mean and not necessarily what we think we truly mean, right? And semiotics is a study of signs and symbols. It's related in linguistics, especially as a means of language or communication, right? While semantics is just a branch of linguistics studying the meaning of words. So semantics is more of the meanings of words. Semiotics is sort of the symbols and the relations of them together. And then metaphors we'll see a bit about as a way of expressing the beingness in the world. Some of you may be familiar with polyvagal theory. We're going to dive a little bit more into that. Right? It's an evolutionary model of how a body and the nervous system of that body are regulating towards perceptions of safety. And the last is the yielding, or the development, the 5 developmental actions, right? And yielding is a way of being with the world as it is, right? And in this case, the developmental actions, I got them from a lady named Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, who is body-mind centering. And we'll talk about that. I've actually moved. Originally, I was going to have this at the end, but I figured because we're going to be talking a bit, or I'm going to be talking a bit, let's start with the body first, so that we can actually feel a little bit more instead of just being all lost in this. And so the 5 fundamental actions, there is a natural progression towards this. It's how infants begin to learn to move in the world. And so we learn them in this order. And then we continue to manifest most harmoniously as a sequence in the same order. Right? So we have yielding, pushing, reaching, grasping, pulling. And we're going to deal mostly with yielding, but I like to kind of push it out there just to build it that the yielding is the first stage, that if we want to push, we actually have to yield into something to push from. And if we want to reach, we have to, if I want to reach my hand up, I'm sitting. So I'm kind of pushing into my left foot, my left sitting bone to reach my right hand up. And to grasp, well, I have to reach it, and then to pull it in is that. So these are the actions there. But we're only going to really pay attention to yielding here, although we'll pay attention to pushing a bit, sort of accidentally, because when we're not yielding, most likely we are pushing or somewhere further along. And so yielding is not from a contracted state, whereas all the others are built up from contractions. Right? And so we want to find ways to yield that can help us reorient to safety. So we're going to focus on yielding as it is the base action of what the others grow out of, right? It's the root. And much like the root of perception is the phenomena arising, that sentence would have made more sense when I actually did phenomenologically before that. But if it doesn't make sense, don't worry, we're going to get to it. So the root of these actions in the body is yield. And so that's where we want to work from. And right, each further action is being informed by a perception, an idea of how, what, why is needing to be instead of just being. When we can yield, we can just be. Right? We're looking to be before the thought of what is arises, and to be just with this present moment. Right? We yield through the flow of life. In this picture here, you can see a baby. It's what they first do. They climb up to mom. They find where they need to latch onto, assuming they can latch, and they yield. And yielding is not surrendering. Yielding has an activity to it. It's a passive activity. And so through exploring our relationship to a yield, we're able to come more in resonance with our deeper and sometimes unseen, unaware holding patterns. So we're going to start with just an exercise, if that's all right. So whether you're sitting, standing, lying, it doesn't really matter. All I want you to do is just begin to notice your body on whatever is supporting it. So for the example, I'm sitting, my sitting bones will, and my bottom of my pelvis will be supported, but my feet will also be supported here. And for those who maybe even have more practice, you might even notice how your shoulders are they yielding on top of your ribs, on top of your pelvis, or is there a holding there? Right? But we don't really want to go into analysis. We just want to notice. Actually, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. We're just noticing it. We're noticing the space where your body ends and the surface begins. Maybe you're noticing tensions in your body. Maybe you're noticing, are you actually sitting from the idea of how you're supposed to sit, right? Or are you just sitting as simply as can be? You know, and with this and with more, just start to notice how can your body inform you in how to yield more into this space, how to simply be before the idea of how to be even comes into mind. And noticing your breath, perchance your breath has shifted. A lot of times as we begin to let go of these things, again, we can't even see them. We can only notice they're gone because there's a deeper breath, or there's a more weight into the chair or where the ground or whatever. And this is a felt sense awareness of your lived experience that's shifted. And this is a shorter run through of that exercise, but maybe maybe you feel that. And I'll save, if you can have notes, if you want to talk about it, save it to the end, because I don't actually see the chat window on this. And so I won't be able to respond, but I'm happy to go more into this zone. So the art of meditation is a way of getting into touch with reality. And the reason for it is the most civilized people are out of, try again. The reason for it is that most civilized people are out of touch with reality because they confuse the world as it is with the world as they think about it and talk about it and describe it. For on one hand, there's the real world, and on the other, a whole system of symbols about the world which we have in our minds. So this is taken from a lecture of Alan Watts. For those who are unaware of Alan Watts, he was an English writer, a speaker, and he liked to refer to himself as a philosophical entertainer. He was very widely known for interpreting and popularizing Japanese, Chinese, Indian traditions of Buddhism, Taoism, and Hindu philosophy, and making them more accessible for a Western audience. So when Alan talks about symbols here, he's actually referring to concepts, numbers, and words, as these are representations of things. They're a model or a symbol for the thing, yet they're not the thing. And when we go into semiotics, we're going to see how this ties back in. And you're start to see how each of these topics they all interrelate. They all have nested together in some way. And what he's essentially saying is that how we perceive the world is a perception of what really is. And that through meditation, we can begin to get out of concepts of the world and into reality as it is. And so here we may see another paradox. It's what I refer to sometimes as the master paradox. It's the paradox of meditation. Because as I've mentioned already, meditation can be described as being without thought. But if meditation is without thought, how could we ever explain it from this cognitive expression, right? Because any explanation would come from a cognitive dimension or a thought realm. And so the explanation would not be it. We could actually get stuck within that, right? And in meditation, there are these moments before or after thought. And it can be experienced and yet not fully explained for the reasons mentioned. And it's in this experience with the absence of thought, there's a solely lived, embodied presence. And presence as pure presence before it's named and labeled, because this labeling is born from cognition, which is after the pure experience. And when we go into the psychology section, this will make more sense. So again, stay with me, and I'm trying to do less words, but it's difficult. So just remember that to even talk about it is to get closer to it, but not to it fully. And so those in the room who've been in states of meditation, you may understand what I'm referring to here. And so instead of just talking about it, because talking is great, I wanted to try to even just have a few minutes to sit in meditation, right, and notice the mind's ability to go, or maybe to not go, to not let go. So similar like the last exercise, whether you're sitting or you're standing, whatever, take a moment to get comfortable. You now also have the benefit of possibly knowing what a comfortable yielding position was, and have that ability, like Ryan was talking about. You now have more information in to even possibly find that comfortable spot easier, find that place where you're not resisting so much, and just sit in there. And if you have a meditation practice, you can bring it in. If you don't, if you've never meditated, no worries. I'll give you a simple one of just focusing on your breath. All right, and then slowly coming out. It's about 2 minutes. So again, maybe you noticed the mind did go somewhere, or maybe not. And at this point, it's not so important if you reach enlightenment, more the process towards. So in a playful way, I could correlate today's talk with this photo. The monks in the garden doing what they believe is best. Right? They don't know what else they could be doing that's more aligned with the Zen framework. And they're in a place of contentment and also are likely far off from the point of Zen or meditation. And we'll look more into what Zen meditation is. I love the sand angel monk, always makes me smile. So what exactly is Zen? So it's something, here's a rather simplistic summation. I'm going to read the slide. It's something we are. It's our true nature expressing itself moment by moment. And it's something we do, a disciplined practice through which we can realize the joy of being. It's not a belief system to which one converts, and there's no dogma or doctrine. Zen is the direct experience of what we might call ultimate reality or the absolute. Yet it's not separate from the ordinary or the relative. The direct experience is also said to be our birthright. So the practice of Zazen, and Zazen is meditation, is a way of realizing this non-dualistic, vibrant, subtle, and interconnected nature of all life. And there's different practices of Zen, Zazen being one of them. And non-dualism we're going to go into. For some, you might be familiar with. For others, this might be a new concept. So while it was not just the Zen who used inquiry methods, right? The Zen folk really took hold of the inquiry practice and developed numerous koans just for being with this paradox of life. And we'll play with koans in a little bit. But the Hindus also had another practice that they called neti neti, which is not this, not this. And you would basically meditate on yourself and take away parts that your hand is not you, it's your hand, and slowly taking away to what was left, right? And the Gnostics had their ways, as did many other contemplative practices and religious ways. And there's also a who I am as also an inquiry into getting at the root of what do we really know, right? What is known and what has been taught. And it's a way of picking apart our ontological makeup and the constructional foundation of what has been taught and what is ultimately real. So when we begin to inquire by ourselves or again with another, we have a chance to look more at the constructs and models we take ourselves and the world around us to be. If there was a sliver of fault in any construct, we can rectify it and then thus be in better relations. And again, this ties in, this is very similar to, in some regard, to the somatic experiencing and the other practices that Ryan has talked about. And so I believe it's important to say that many of the original contemplative practices, they regarded the body as not really important. In fact, it was something sometimes even denied to be, a hurdle to get over. If you sit in meditation long enough, don't worry about the body, you'll transcend it. What we're going to look at in our slides to come is actually the importance of our bodies and of our nervous system to help inform us of the rich source of knowingness that the body has. And so here's a bit, oops, let's go back a bit. Here's a bit where I can drop a little bit more into non-duality. Non-duality is actually sort of impossible to explain because it's a paradox within itself. But I'll sort of talk about it a bit here, which is to say, like, this approach is non-dual. And so by that, I mean, there's no absolutes except for the absolute of presence, consciousness, spirit, whatever we want to call it. Right? So we're always working towards an idea, and we may likely never reach it fully, as the idea is not the thing, but a representational model of the thing. So as there are no absolutes, there's no right or wrong. The person's experience and safety, top priority. We'll see more about safety as we go in, especially into polyvagal. So these inquiries are never meant to be statements of, rather a wonderment of if there could be other or more than what is currently thought or sensed to be. So this can create a sense of awareness of unawareness by starting to grow this larger field. So The exercise I want to play a bit with to bring in is I was going to do about 3 koans. I mentioned the word earlier. For those that don't know, koans, they can be described in various ways. Some are riddles, some are stories. Generally, there's no real solution. They're rather used to provoke reflection on the inadequacy of logical reasoning and to lead to enlightenment. In other words, they're tricks to get us from a place of cognition to a place of non or precognition. So let's try some on. I'll say a few. We'll take a little time with it after I say it, to sit with it, to ruminate on it. And I'll start with some easier ones, and then we're going to move on to some challenging ones. Well, I mean, that's all depending on the person. So the first one, some of you may have heard of, especially if you were a Simpsons fan in the early seasons. It's 2 hands clap and there is a sound. What is the sound of one hand, or sometimes known as one hand clapping? So take a moment with that. 2 hands clap and there is a sound. What is the sound of one hand? And as this will be recorded, you can play with them at home. Normally, these would take a lot longer than the few moments I'm going to give here, but it's something. The second one, 2 monks are arguing about a flag. One says, the flag is moving. The other says, the wind is moving. A third walks by and says, not the wind, not the flag, the mind is moving. And then the last one is, without thinking of good or evil, show me your original face before your mother and father were born. So, I mean, each of those alone, we could spend a lot of time in, but we don't have a lot of time. We have a lot to cover. So we're going to move on. But again, you're welcome to sit with those. And if anyone has reached enlightenment during this talk or afterwards, please let us know. I think Ryan will give you an extra hour of CE for that. So phenomenology is the study of that which appears. And in eco-psychology, there's this relation of people to people and also of people to the world around them, which is different than the traditional view of psychology, which was of people in relation to themselves and possibly to others. And this will become really a big part of it when we start to see again how we're relating to the world. And so in terms of the steps of the process, the way that I sort of view this, I mean, just this way of sort of understanding it, phenomena is the base level. Right? Something occurs, for example, a cloud moves and the sun appears from behind it. So that's just the phenomena. The recognition or the awareness of it is next. Right? We become aware of a change or a shift. In this case, light enters our visual awareness, or heat is sensed in our physical awareness. Sensation is abound without a broader definition yet. And what I mean by that is that even if light appearing at this stage, the word and concept of light is still not there. It's a simple, pure presence, sensorial nature. Naming or defining is next. So after the recognition of the shift or the change comes a name. There's light, sun, heat, etc. Right? We name the shift from perception of what we have learned it could be. The sensation I'm now aware of is light, and similar, like Ryan has said, because we go into predictive modeling from what has happened before. And then after that, we give a value. So the light is from the sun. It does X, Y, Z. When I was 5, I looked at the sun and blah, blah, blah. I like the sun. I don't like the sun. Right? These are values that we give, and they're stories based on those values as well. And so to live in a world of the top value is just the given value, the phenomena, and not what lies below is to live, to live in the top value being give value. I made this upside down. So to live in the top value and not living in what gives what lies below is to live strictly in ideas of the world and not really living in the world as it is. And we're going to continue to dive more into this in the next slides as this becomes a cornerstone. This becomes sort of cornerstone as all the pieces come together. So David Abrams has this little quote here. I'll read it in a second. And David Abrams was one of the people who have really helped bring this topic of eco-psychology out even more mainstream. That was been happening before him, but he wrote a book in the late 90s called Spell of the Sensuous, which I highly recommend. And that started to help, I think, grow it outside of just the model that it was currently in the small sort of cultish way it was. So he writes here, to directly perceive any phenomena is to enter into relationship with it, to feel oneself in a living interaction with another being. To define the phenomena as an inert object, to deny the ability of a tree to inform and even instruct one's awareness, is to have turned one's senses away from that phenomena. It is to ponder the tree from outside of its world, or rather from outside of the world, and in which both oneself and the tree are active participants. Right? So in this writing, when he's saying to define or to name, it's essentially is to judge or label, as I mentioned in the previous slide, right? And we're going to also look at judgment a little later from a phenomenological perspective. And in this eco-psychological view, when we're directly perceiving the phenomena, we are relating with it before a definition. Right? It's only when we define or judge the phenomenon and experience that we enter a reality of thought, of which we've already seen a few ways is just covering it up. Right? But if we're beneath the top level of thought and more into the level of phenomena or recognition of phenomena, then we can begin to uncouple from thought and then find our place of direct experience. Right? And it's in this place our observation is before the labeling of, and therefore there's no values besides is, or what I sometimes call isness. Right? It's not a judgment, as there's not an opinion except that it is, and it's this direct experience where embodiment is at home. And this is something I've really been sitting with since I've written the talk, is that the idea of embodiment is not embodiment. It's still the same thing. It's another concept. So we have to get out of these ideas and drop into these places of presence. And so I want to also highlight that we can get to a place of recognizing phenomena as a phenomena and not going into the labeling and stories of good, bad, angry, or whatever the mind's construct is relating to the phenomena as, right? As a thing without a prejudice to what value the thing may have. We can get there. And this also ties nicely into the foundation of Buddhism. For those who are familiar with Buddha's foundations, this is essentially it as well, right? And so as we move into semantics, we'll see how the labeling of experiences with symbols will add more judgments via definitions to this direct experience. But before we get there, again, we've gone a lot into words, so let's take a moment away from words and let's even just try something on here for a moment. Because for those who have been in deep states of meditation, or those who have seen a baby's eye where you just get locked in it and your world falls away, you've been in these places before. So what I want you to do is I want you to notice something in the room. And please, if you can, choose a non-living being, a human, a cat. Try to choose something not living, preferably not moving if you can, but it's okay if it is. And just choose something, and I want you to look at it and get curious about it. You can map it with your eyes. And we're just looking. We're not even making a story about it. We're just looking at this object, right? Get a sense about it. The colors, the textures, the sensorialness of it, right? Be in relation with whatever you see. Now, and if this feels comfortable, let whatever you're looking at see you. Let yourself be seen by it. If you're staring at the wall is noticing you. And notice what you notice as you're being watched by this thing. How do you feel? What can you sense in this moment? Can you be with the phenomena before the labeling of it? Right? Simply being, noticing. You can let that go again. You're welcome to play with it longer when we have more time. So I love this quote. It was very small, but changed my life when I sat with it. The Europeans might be more familiar with it. The limits of my language means the limits of my world, right? By Ludwig Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein was considered by some to be the greatest philosopher of the 20th century, and he's considered a grandparent of the philosophy of language. So how could we begin to understand something of which our language does not have words or ways of expressing, defining, or having relation with? So a little bit about me. I spent 12 years living all over the globe in many different countries and cultures. And what was brought to light for me was how different each culture and each language defined their relation with the world. Each new language brought new learning, and that's not always comfortable, right? I say this as at times to learn new is to learn what was taken to be the way or the truth, right? Is actually simply a perspective of it. And while enriching my worldview, it was also showing me the limits of my understanding, right, until this moment when another possibility was there. It was an existential moment, right? Until I was introduced to these ways, my worldview was much more limited. So yeah, let's talk a little about a language and its importance here for embodiment. So if embodiment is a way of our body being full in this world, and our mind has a somewhat controlling factor on that, then understanding the preciseness of values and labels, which the mind perceives to be, is really important to decouple the mind's perception of reality, right? The mind's perception of reality from reality. So this uncoupling can begin to bring us back to the source of the embodied experience. The more we pick apart, what are we actually saying and meaning here, the more we can get to the root of what it is and not the mental overlay we're projecting. So in other words, I have this little infographic here: embodiment as the lived experience of being in the world, language as a way of understanding, conversing with the world. The more we refine a deeper understanding of one's language, is imperative to be as fully in expression as one can be with the world, and that's inquiry. And a degree or two off leads us to a gradual shift further away from what and where we believe we are. So the deconstruction of our language to get to the root information, sensorially speaking, right, that's arising right now. And I don't have it here, but there would be an arrow from the blue back up to the orange, because it's a constant sort of process here. And here's going to come with just a little more verbosity, a little more words, and I apologize, but I believe it's really important here, because and it's partly because I don't want you just to accept. I want an understanding, and that at this point, as I kind of talk a little bit about what's called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, it's going to have a few more words, and I do apologize. So the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis states that the grammatical and more verbal structure of a person's language influences how they perceive the world. It emphasizes that languages either determine or influence one's thought. And so, for example, different words mean various things in other languages. So what we see here is turquoise, right? And so in respect to color, as according to this, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, we would actually not see turquoise unless we had a name for it, right? So think of a child who's not yet acquired the word for turquoise, right? To them, this is either blue or green. Similar in Arabian cultures, or in some Arabian cultures, what I've been told is they have different names for different yellow shades of sand, right? While to people like me who are not accustomed to seeing sand all the time, it sort of all looks the same, right? So most of us, sand is sand, snow is snow, right? Or it may have been until just now, right, when we learned of another way. So our language is defining how much we see and interact with the world. It's also our own lived experience that can help us grow beyond the limits of language. And we're going to look a little bit here at metaphors and their role. And this comes from Metaphors We Live by George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, who are cognitive scientists, linguistics, and philosophers. Metaphors are basically devices for understanding and have little to do with the objective reality, if there even is such a thing. The fact that our conceptual system is inherently metaphorical, the fact that we understand the world, think, and function in metaphorical terms, and the fact that metaphors cannot merely be understood, but can be meaningful and true, as well as these facts, all suggest that an adequate account of meaning and truth can only be based on understanding. And our next slides, they're going to pick this apart more. So let's dive into the importance of metaphors here. So metaphors can help us to understand abstract or relatively unclear concepts. Metaphors are conceptual and metaphors are embodied. By using metaphor, we can explain something that someone has not understood and allow them to have a felt sense understanding of it from a perspective which they do not understand from a previous lived experience. Right? A resonance is sparked. And metaphors can be seen, heard, and felt. And in fact, they themselves are metaphors there. So in other words, the use of metaphors is a way for ourselves or our clients to take information through their own felt experience of it. The metaphor has a resonance of an idea, and that allows something that was not aware or not fully aware to become more aware. And just a little note here for somatics, for those who are familiar with somatics, I think about somatic movements as essentially a metaphor, right? Somatics can use ways of moving without saying that direct movement. They're usually indirect and client learning focused. Right? So somatics would not say walk on all fours, putting right hand in front of left and having legs follow. Rather, they would maybe say begin to move like a dog strolling through a field on a very enjoyable day, or let your arms wiggle like a worm on the ground after a rain, or maybe even let your shoulders hang like honey dripping off a honey dipper. And so what we're doing there is using a metaphorical way that a person who maybe doesn't know how to move in a way, or maybe they move a certain way, but when we inquire them to think of a dog moving, it has a different feeling, it has a different resonance, it has a different idea to it that allows the person to feel it. And metaphors can fall into different typographies as well. In the top part, we're just talking about orientational structure metaphors. Right? So again, this comes from Metaphors We Live By. So since there are systemic correlates between our emotions like happiness and our sensory motor experiences like erect posture, these form the basis of orientational metaphorical concepts such as happy is up, right? Happiness being I feel really up today. I'm really happy today. I'm peppy. Some metaphors allow us to conceptualize our emotions in more sharply defined terms and also to relate them to other concepts having to do with general well-being. And then below, I have some examples of these structural orientational metaphors in which we're using orientated or directional based words, right, and themes to relate to our current experience. So that boosted my spirits. I'm feeling high. I have control over him. I'm on top of the situation. These are related to height, as opposed to I'm depressed. His mood sank. He's under threat. He's at the bottom of the ladder. Right? Using these structural relational to understand things a little more. So I want to try a few on, again, to start to bring things into our own experience. And as I say them or you say them to yourself, are you able to feel a different sensorial experience? Right? So let's start with the first one. He's going through a roller coaster of emotions. Just kind of notice, Again, you can just listen to me, or you can say it to yourself, or you can even say it out loud. He's going through a roller coaster of emotions. I'm feeling blue. Actually, I would even say you could try this on. I'm feeling blue, or I'm feeling green. And here, at least green usually refers to an envious type thing. Notice, is there a different sensorial experience as you say this in your body and or your mind? They really flared up my temper. She was fishing for compliments. They have such a bubbly personality. And so just like noticing, how that feels in your body or your mind, and notice if there's any difference. And if there isn't, it's all good. It's not me telling you what you're supposed to notice. And one example I mentioned, these may bring on a different sensorial experience. So for example, when I said that really flared up my temper, meant that have a different experience in your body or mind than, my temper is on. That really flared up my temper, and my temper is on. Both saying more or less the same thing, but slightly different. So, and as I mentioned, I moved the yielding up to the top, partly for bringing more body in, but also partly to give you all a clue to yield in case we go too heady, and you can drop into the body a bit more. But now we're going to move back into the body a little more, because we've been dealing with a lot of metaphysical things, right? Thoughts and how they perceive us in the world. And I want to move into this tangible bridge between body and mind. Right? So mind and body are always interrelated. Right? You can't have a body without a mind. You can't have a mind without a body. And there's a variety of how much. Right? And so here's a really oversimplified and reductionist way of looking at this, and just for time and understanding's sake. So we have a physical body, right? And we have metaphysical minds, thoughts, or other unaware phenomena. There's a physical relation to ourselves and to the world around us, right? So I'm sitting in the chair, there's a physical relation with that. There's also metaphysical relations, anxiety, worries, overthinking. And then there are both physical and metaphysical relations. For example, an injury that's held from a psychological reaction, holding patterns, mental responses held in the body, freeze response. Freeze response is going to tie into next topic about polyvagal theory. So a regulated nervous system is reacting first through received sensual information. And this information may be encoded through the mind, or it may exist within pure perceptual and sensual realms. So neuroception and interoception, creating awareness and feedback before the mind can even label it as anything besides the experience it is. And there's a wealth of research on this subject and what's happening on a neurological level. And just again, for time's sake, we're not going to be discussing all of that today, but I encourage looking more into polyvagal theory. It can be a wonderful tool. Simplified, for me, polyvagal theory is a way for the mapping and realization of one's embodiment. How safe and aware am I in this moment? A part of it is co-regulation. And so co-regulation is something that happens between two mammals. It's a social interaction that helps us to regulate physiology and thus optimize the bodily resources. Over time, mammals have developed what's called a ventral vagal social engagement system. And these are biological pathways unique to mammals that allow for social bonding and an increased chance of survival. So the contraction for mobilization is a physiological reaction to a mental perception of threat. When the threat is left on, even when not consciously aware, it's having us held in states of physiological tension patterns. We won't be able to relax except for the perception of being relaxed, which is not really a truly relaxed or safe space. And so there are some ways we're going to look at to help reinform being that are safe. One of them was actually what we've already done, which is yielding. If we have a moment and sit down and we kind of see, are we as soft as we can be? Are we in the space? If we are not safe in one way or another, we're not going to let ourselves go down. Something will hold, or numerous things will hold. So yielding can be a way of starting to work through some of these physiological tension patterns that we're not even aware of. We're going to do 2 exercises here to also drop a little bit more into the experience of felt safety. So the first one is a different breathwork approach that's known as the Valsalva maneuver. It was named after an Italian anatomist and surgeon, Antonio Maria Valsalva. So I'm going to walk you through it. First, I just want you to begin by breathing normally. So don't even think about breathing, just breathe whatever is normally. And then I'm going to read what we're going to do twice. The first time, just listen to it. The second time, we'll go through it. Right? So again, just don't do it yet. Just listen. We're going to eventually we'll close our mouth. We'll pinch the nose, and we'll gently exhale through the closed airway for 15 to 20 seconds. And what I mean by that is we're not closing really, really tight. We're pinching, but enough that we can breathe through a little bit. And the reason why is that the resulting pressure on the chest cavity stimulates the vagus nerve. So now we get to do it. So we're breathing normally, right? We're going to close the mouth, pinch the nose a bit, and gently exhale through the closed airway for 15 to 20 seconds. And I forgot to mention, if you feel like you're going to pass out, please don't go further. It's going in your own time with whatever feels comfortable. So if you've reached 20 seconds, you'll come back to normal breathing. You're welcome to do it again. You're welcome to do it more times. I'm curious, and this is something that we can ask later on when the question part is, even just doing this once, do you notice anything different? For example, for me, even just doing that, I notice my feet a little more on the ground. My voice is a little slower, and I'm a little excited about giving a talk. So I go a little bit up, I get excited, which is okay. And then doing that, it kind of brings me back down, My vagus nerve kicks off a bit more. Maybe you have other experiences. So again, that's an exercise you can do on your own. We're going to do a slightly different exercise here. So reminiscing on pleasant memories. So you're going to be encouraged to remember moments when you were content or you felt loved. And again, if that feels comfortable. Some of us have our own stories where that we're not able to go there, and that's fine for today. And if you can have a moment where you felt content or loved, right? Just bring that in. Don't go into the story so much, just bring the memory in, because these memories can stimulate a release of oxytocin, which is a feel-good hormone in the brain, helps calm and relax us during stressful situations. And we're saying that doesn't mean like we're in a stressful situation and we bring it on in that moment. Stress is great. It's sort of when we're stuck in it or we need help getting out of it. But there are moments when stress is also serves us. And for those who maybe have trouble invoking that, maybe imagine spending time with a close friend or a family member who evokes feelings of security, right? That can also help activate the vagus nerve and encourage the social engagement system. Maintaining these bonds with others is a meaningful way to ensure connection. And again, it's a little brief here, but just sort of noticing, has there been a shift in the state of you and or your body and or your mind in relation to either yourself or what's going on around you? Has even just this small, bringing this into memory, change something within your awareness? Okay, so this already may have been a lot, and I'm going to attempt to bring all of these seemingly broad topics into one larger model of healing through a paradox. I can hear the clapping already. So why I've talked a bit about, language relating to embodiment, and why do thoughts relate to embodiment, right? Well, we've talked about meditation as a place before thought, right? And that thoughts are created and formed from these sense stimulus. And thoughts can also be created from other thought stimulus. That's when we get stuck within this mental world. Or he did that, and then building on, as opposed to external in, it's an internal in thought. Before the stimulus informs the mind, right? There's a space. And here there is opportunity in just being with phenomena as it is versus how we perceive it to be. Conscious as a way to perceive control of the world, right? Unconscious as a way just to be with the world. Right? And where is our body when the mind is in these thoughts? And so if our world is misperceived and informed from a mind, again, slightly askew, the body will likely be in a resistance to the quote unquote real world, as it does not match with our smaller subjective world. And we're going to look a little more at thinking versus knowing. It's a bit semantical, but it's a big breath between them. And looking at, well, where is our body in these moments of thought? So the body interacts with worldly phenomena, right, including gravity. Right? And the story of phenomena is informed by our mind, the story is. So we're always orienting to an idea of safety coming from a mind's understanding of well, what is safe. And our body structure is informed greatly from what our mind believes it to be as subjective truth, regardless of the objective truth. So safety can be perceived as non-safe, and then we're resisting and fighting a world which is not safe. And that's a bit of how the polyvagal ties into it here. It can be in this position, but cowering because it doesn't feel safe. And even you might even just take a moment as you feel that. If I say, what does safety feel like and unsafety? There's a contraction in the felt experience. Right. So when I ask my clients how they're feeling, it's very common for them at first, they say, oh, I feel good, I feel happy, I never go into a story. But as we sort of begin to see, happiness is thought-based on, and it's informed from perceptions of safety. Right? It's not actually a feeling, though it may be informed from the feelings. So we'll begin to see how a thought and a knowingness have a different sense in our mind's perception of the body's response. And I'll just sort of read here that sense is one of the methods for living and being to gather data of the world. It's the actual senses, while thought is a form created in the mind rather than the forms perceived through the five senses or an instance of thinking. And I won't go too much into it, but that feelings and thoughts get conflated a lot. So we'll say a thought as a feeling. It's one way of actually being a little less embodied because we are in the thought world versus the actual world, because there's a lot more tied to feeling. And a lot of times we don't want to feel. Right? So this is a bit what I was talking about. We can have feelings as feelings and also thoughts as feelings. So ideally, when in feeling, we are in our bodily experience. And if we're in the thought of the feeling, then we're more in this mental than bodily experience. And we can test to start to learn the difference, right? So how to know the difference is to start to learn the language of our embodied experience. And we've actually already been doing that through the exercises today. Right? One other way that can be is with an external practitioner, right? Because they can also see some stuff that we're not always aware of and help guide us. And another way, as we've mentioned, is through meditation. Because meditation is the place before thought when we get there. And no thought simply brings sensation. So finding ourselves in a place of more feeling than thinking is a way to be at a level of sensing before the label of thought. And as mentioned, yielding can be very helpful here to recognize, am I comfortable? Am I safe? Am I relaxed? Or is there a tension that's keeping me not fully in yield? And not all tensions are bad as well, but it's informing us. Because attention is largely informed from the mind, whether conscious or subconscious. So remember earlier on when I said that this is a non-dual process, here's one way to begin to sense into non-duality. And that's that the body can only label phenomena as anything good, bad, or et cetera, right, from a mental construct of it, which is a layer above what is actually happening. Before the constructs comes in, there's simply awareness, present as it is. Right? Our body doesn't inherently know good or bad, safe or unsafe. It only knows this. So I like to say the mind is dual. It's creating all these different things. It's analyzing. It's having this starkness. But the body, it doesn't know anything other than is. It simply is this and is. So it's non-dual in that regard. So reality, as mentioned about even before with Ryan's, again, to tie it back together, reality is heavily complex and immense, right? And simplifying it to fit our narrative is really helpful to go about a day-to-day. But with simplifications comes pieces left out. Hence why I've been talking so much and still have left a lot out. But if I left even more out, we'd be even more lost, right? So things left out are required not to be there as a way to simplify a larger into a small. But this is then less inclusive of the whole in order to fit the initial need to shorten. So by its very nature, a shortened version can't include the original larger version. And so language as a tool to communicate is a way to shorten the larger experience of beingness into a simplified, codified concept of beingness. It can also be used as an expression of the simplified concept of beingness. Thoughts are the mind's use of language to relay the simplified concept of beingness to itself and the world around itself. They're not the world, rather a simplified reductionist version of the world, and thus not fully a truth of the world. So there's a place before language where we can be as truth, where we can know ourselves in the world, not by layers of thought, but by pure existential beingness. It's in this place before language, there is the body as experience, the here, the now, pure relation to reality. And it is this mind which creates stories or distractions from pure reality. The body doesn't lie. It can, however, be misled from the mind. And then it then relates to the world through a wrapping of thought or mental chatter, as the yogis would call it, chittavrittis. So it may seem like a paradox that to know ourselves best, we need to forget almost everything we have taken to be. And that the road to self-awareness begins with realizing just how little self-awareness we have. Our ideas having provided us with perceptions of safety and a world around us to be, right? They're simply ideas. They may be true and they may not fully be true. No. Thought is about ideas. Knowledge is less about the ideas and has a more visceral component to it. It can be felt. Learning to discern the differences and to find out how much of our ontology or our belief system is a layer of thought. So if we don't have a secure ground of felt sense safety and the letting go of constructs, this ideology won't work yet, as there will still be a resistance underneath it, which is doing what it can to keep us in a perception of safety, right? And this theory won't fit that. That's cool. When I work with clients who have that secure ground and have felt safety and awareness, even though this can be scary and may not make logical sense, the feeling is there. They can't explain it, yet they know it in their bones and their tissues and their whole body. We can't push ourselves there, right? As that's still a thought of what should be and not what is. We can only sit with it and yield more into it. So we're coming back to the title at the slide at the very beginning. Again, we'll see if it makes more sense in some way. Ideally, that's the goal, but may not. So where we find safety is largely from how we perceive the world around us to be. We can only fully yield into a place of ease when there's no perception of threat. And that comes from how are we processing the interior and exterior world. That's the orange one there. Our senses inform us that the phenomena in our mind converts it into a perceptual form. When our language is not aligned as best with the situation, we get further from the truth, and our body is unable to fully yield or allow. Our body has information before the cognition of it, and it's inherently interacting with the world at layers ahead of the mind's labeling. When we can get more into our embodied nature, we can be more at one with ourselves and the world around us. And this is where healing takes place. Once we get to a place of yield, of safety, of rest, we're able to now reorient from a new ground, a ground of embodied resilience. Uh, so that's a lot. It's a lot. And I apologize. And I'm also not sorry. I think that's the new catchphrase, sorry, not sorry. Uh, if people have more questions that they want to ask in private, here's how you can, here's some of the best ways to reach me. Um, I find this stuff really, really fun. I find it really life-changing. I also realize it can be a lot. Titration can be very important. So maybe it's just taking a little bit of time. Uh, but again, I hope that I hope some sparks were ignited.